The solicitor read the will twice before I believed it, because the woman who had destroyed my family had left me everything she owned. My name is Marlowe Quinn, and for 6 years I had hated Beatrix Sorel with a quiet, disciplined hatred I kept folded away like a knife in a drawer, sharp but never drawn, because a woman in my position could not afford to be seen wanting revenge, only to be seen enduring. Beatrix had taken my father's textile mill in a hostile purchase engineered through debts she herself had quietly bought up and called in without warning, had watched him lose his health and then his life within 18 months of losing his life's work, and had sat in the front pew at his funeral wearing black lace and an expression of perfect, practiced sympathy that made my hands shake around the hymnal. Now she was dead, found at the bottom of the mill's old grain elevator shaft on a Tuesday morning by a foreman who said she had been perfectly well the evening before, and her solicitor was informing me, in a voice thick with his own confusion, that Beatrix Sorel had rewritten her will 4 months prior, leaving the mill, the townhouse, and the whole of her considerable fortune to me. She left a letter as well, the solicitor said, sliding a sealed envelope across his desk with the caution of a man handling something that might still be dangerous. Sealed. Addressed to you specifically. I was instructed not to read it myself, only to deliver it once the will was executed. I did not open it that day. I could not make my hands cooperate with the idea of Beatrix Sorel's handwriting speaking to me from beyond whatever fate had put her at the bottom of that shaft, and instead I carried the envelope home unopened and set it on my kitchen table, where it sat for 3 days like a held breath, while the town buzzed with a question I found myself, despite everything, unable to ignore. Nobody believed Beatrix's death was an accident. The grain elevator had been sealed off for repairs for weeks, its access door kept locked, and the only key hung in the foreman's office, which meant someone had either given her that key or had taken her to that shaft themselves. I opened the letter on the 4th night, by candlelight, because some part of me understood already that the answer she owed me was inside it. Marlowe, it began, in handwriting far less steady than the woman I remembered. If you are reading this, then I did not live long enough to say what I am about to write, and perhaps that is a fitting irony, given what I did to your father. I did not ruin him out of business ambition, as the town believes. I ruined him because he knew something about my late husband's death that I could not allow to become known, and because your father, God forgive him and God forgive me more, was the one man in this town honest enough that I feared he would eventually say it aloud. I read that paragraph 4 times before I understood it, and each time the ground beneath my careful, disciplined hatred shifted a little further. My father had not lost the mill to simple cruelty. He had lost it because he knew something about the death of Beatrix's husband, Julian Sorel, who had drowned in the mill pond 11 years earlier in what the whole town had long accepted as a tragic accident during a night of heavy drinking. The letter went on to explain, in halting, guilt-heavy sentences, that Julian Sorel had not drowned by accident, that my father had seen something on the night of his death he never spoke it to anyone, but had once, in a moment of drunken grief of his own, half confessed to a business partner who later repeated it to Beatrix, and that Beatrix, terrified of a truth she herself had spent 11 years trying to bury, had systematically and quietly destroyed the one man who might, someday, remember clearly enough to speak it. She did not, in the letter, say what my father had seen. She said only that she intended to tell me in person, that she had summoned the courage at last to make amends by returning everything she had taken and confessing the rest face to face, and that if I was reading this letter instead of hearing it from her own mouth, it meant something had gone wrong before she had the chance. I sat with that letter until dawn, and by morning I understood that Beatrix Sorel had not fallen into that grain shaft by accident any more than her husband had drowned in that mill pond by accident, and that whoever had stopped her from telling me the truth was very likely the same person who had wanted Julian Sorel's death to remain a settled matter 11 years ago. The foreman, a broad, quiet man named Ezra Doone who had worked the mill since before my father owned it, seemed the obvious place to start, given that the elevator key hung in his office and he alone had discovered the body. But when I asked him carefully whether Beatrix had visited the mill the evening before her death, his face did something I had not expected. It crumpled briefly into something like grief. She came to see me, he admitted. Asked about the old records, the night ledger from the year Mr. Sorel drowned. I told her I still had it in the office archive, and she asked to borrow it. I never saw her alive again after she left with that ledger under her arm. The night ledger, a record of who had come and gone from the mill grounds, kept faithfully by whoever manned the gatehouse each evening, a formality so mundane that no one, apparently, had thought to burn it in 11 years. I found it not in Ezra's office, where he swore he had left it, but hidden inside the false bottom of an old grain scale in the mill's disused weighing room, wrapped in oilcloth exactly as though someone had placed it there in haste, meaning to retrieve it later and never had the chance. The entry for the night of Julian Sorel's death listed 3 names who had passed through the gatehouse after dark. Julian himself, arriving alone at 9. Beatrix, arriving 20 minutes later. And a third name, written in a hand I recognized immediately because I had grown up watching it sign my school reports and my father's business letters. Suspenseful. My own aunt, my father's elder sister, who had managed the mill's accounts for 30 years and had, upon my father's death, quietly taken a position managing Beatrix Sorel's household finances instead, a transition the town had always found faintly strange, and I had always been too grieved to question. I confronted her that same evening, in the parlor of the townhouse she now occupied as Beatrix's former companion, and watched 30 years of careful, controlled composure finally give way. Julian Sorel was going to ruin your father, she said, before I had even finished asking the question, as though the confession had been sitting behind her teeth for 11 years waiting for permission to escape. He had discovered discrepancies in the mill accounts, discrepancies I had made, small ones, over many years, to keep this family solvent after your grandfather's debts nearly buried us. Julian was a vindictive, small man who took pleasure in exposure for its own sake, and he told me that night, at the mill, that he intended to ruin both your father's reputation and mine within the week. So you killed him. I pushed him, she said, and her voice cracked on the word in a way that told me she had never once said it aloud before that moment. In an argument by the mill pond. I did not plan it. He fell and struck his head on the sluice gate, and by the time I understood what had happened, he was gone, and I was too frightened to do anything but leave and pray no one had seen me. But someone had seen you. Your father, she said, walking home late from the mill office. He said nothing to the magistrate, out of loyalty to me, his own sister, but he could never quite look at me the same way afterward, and I have spent 11 years terrified that his silence would eventually break. Her hands twisted in her lap. When Beatrix began asking questions about the ledger, about that night, I understood she had finally decided to unearth the truth, whatever the cost to either of us, and I could not let her reach you with it before I had decided what to do. So you killed her too. I only meant to reason with her, Constance said, and here, for the first time, her composure fractured completely. I met her at the elevator, where she said she wished to speak privately away from the house staff. I beg her not to tell you, not after everything, not when you'd already lost so much. She told me she owed you the truth regardless of what it cost either of us. We argued. She stepped back toward the open shaft without looking in the dark, and she stopped. I did not reach for her in time. I have asked myself every night since whether some part of me did not truly try. I did not go to the magistrate that night. I sat with my aunt's confession the way I had sat with Beatrix's letter, turning it over in the dark, understanding at last that the mill, the fortune, the whole inheritance now legally mine had been bought with two deaths 11 years apart. One of them an accident born of fear, the other a silence that had finally, fatally, run out of room to hide in. In the end, it was Constance herself who walked into the magistrate's office 3 days later, without my urging, and told the whole of it plainly, sparing herself nothing. The discrepancies, the argument by the mill pond, the elevator shaft, the 11 years of silence that had cost my father his health and Beatrix her life, and had very nearly cost her the last of her own conscience as well. I kept the mill. I could not, in good faith, refuse an inheritance built from a confession that had finally set two dead people's truths free, even one I had not asked for and had spent 6 years believing I would never want. I visit the mill pond sometimes now, in the evenings when the water is very still and the light comes low and gold across it, and I think of a man I never knew drowning there over accounts he meant to expose, and a woman I hated for 6 years who died trying, at last, to make it right. I did not know that either death deserved the ending it received, but I have stopped believing, as I once did so certainly, that hatred and grief always point toward the same person. Sometimes the truth is not a villain at all, but a family's long, quiet failure to say the hardest thing out loud while there was still time for it to matter.